pipe comes out there, and it's piped down here. This particular spring is about 2 gallons a minute. You know, not enough. Over on Black Rock, there's a spring. I was talking to Derek Blake just last night. It runs 25 gallons a minute. That's a big spring for out here on the strip.
What did the pioneers do when they were moving wood up to do the temple?
Okay.
I mean, how would they?
And what that makes
For water?
me,
Yeah.
what was your question?
For water, he's asking.
For water, yeah.
It's a real issue. And what that reminds me, you might can clue us in on the Sunshine Trail. That's where the timber came from Mount Trumbull for the temple. There's this road, and then there's the Black Rock Gulch.
Where's the honeymoon trail?
The Honeymoon Trail comes off of, like from Fredonia, and comes off of the Hurricane Fault, and comes east and west. These are north and south, you know. And, but water is the big issue out here. And maybe I can keep going a little bit, or maybe let's ask questions. Ask questions, whatever you want to.
Well, Terry, tell a little bit about your ranching operation.
Okay.
And how it ties in to here, if it does.
It does. Let's step back just a little bit, and we finished a service mission, and I didn't really put it all together, and I'm going to refer to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as the Church, the Salt Lake Valley, 1847. Immediately started having problems interacting with the Native Americans that were here. And then through that, Brigham Young gets the idea that maybe he wants to get ahead of it a little bit. 1854, 7 years later, he calls 26 missionaries to come to southern Utah. And the one we're most familiar with is Jacob Hamlin. And there were like 25 others. And correct me if I'm getting
24 missionaries.
Okay. And but Jacob Hamlin's the one we're familiar with. They get here, and one of the 5 things that they were supposed to do was learn the language. And so they were there, they're starting to learn the language. The Swiss settlers come to Santa Clara, 1857. The Washington settlers come, they're dabbling in cotton a little bit. And then in 1861 is when they were called to St. George and the Dixie Mission.
69.
I said,
1867.
my mouth's so dry. Did I say 51?
No. You said 61.
See?
So the
Durant.
the Shivwit Indians' home was out here before they moved down there. They replaced the Tonquin Indians in Santa Clara more or less died with disease with settlement, and the Tonquins were moved by
Anton Ivans.
Yes, into Ivans by Anton Ivans, yes.
Anthony,
The
yeah.
Shivwits down there, they more or less replaced the Tonquins.
Okay. And
And where was the Shivwit home from here? The Shivwit Plateau is where from here?
it's still quite a bit south of us. The high mountain that you can see there is Poverty, and the Shivwit Plateau is another 20-30 miles beyond there.
And that's where John Wesley Powell's people that abandoned the expedition came up and met their fate up there.
How far are we from Mount Trumbull?
It would be 20 miles to Little Tanks, and it's about 10 miles on.
About 35. It's about 35 miles. 35, is that sound about right?
Yeah.
We saw 35 sign ways back, but yeah.
What's your elevation?
You got a motorcycle coming.
I was hoping to find it. There's a marker right here alongside the road. It used to have a steel post, it's gone, and it's 5,001 feet right here. There's a marker here that told us that.
So Terry, one thing a lot of people won't know is out here, before the 30s, the Bundys raised all their stuff without water. It was wet enough, they done a lot of dry land farming, but rain and snow and everything they had out here, so it forced a lot of them out of here. But the old toughies, they stayed here by the springs and everything. But they said grass out here was up to horse's belly and everything else back in those days. But that all changed with the weather pattern sometime. It was global warming, I think, wasn't it, Terry?
And my personal thing, I think it's been up and down the whole time.
You're right.
I know.
Sometimes when it's pretty out here, it's as pretty as you'll ever see. And when it's bad out here, it's about as bad as you'll ever see. And this has not been a good winter. This bale of hay is to feed the horses over here. They've been here all winter, and it really looks good to them. Every time I come by, I bring a bale of hay. But the green is starting to come a little, and that's because of that 2 little storms that we've had. But normally we'd have had a lot more.
So-
Tell us about not much Rancho Yeto and what used to be right here in Parker's. And
Yeah.
Tell us
when
about-
when I was a kid, that was so embarrassing to me.
Well, tell them what it was. I always thought it was pretty good.
Start that around. There's pictures on both sides. Just start that around. The one picture is the same. And this is the house that stood right here. And this was D.M. Parker's homestead and his store.
Oh, wow. Big.
And you can see the gate there in front of the house. You can see it, and that's the original gate. What's left of that gate post right here.
Is the cistern still there?
And the cistern we
Trying
buried.
to say it right.
We were afraid that somebody was going to go over and peek in and fall in. I've read that they think, on one of those Arizona place names, that maybe it was a mistranslation. Going back again, the pioneers came in St. George, 1861. I don't know how soon, but at some point they would have started to venture out on the strip. They were learning the language. They were visiting with the Shivwits, and they might have called it Coyote Spring. We don't know, but somehow it gets to be. And be sure and look on the back. There's a picture on the back.
What year is that car?
And that was one of my questions. If anybody knows the year of that car.
Dave does.
It's like about 4 or 5 years put together.
Oh, jeez.
So Terry, you didn't finish the not much Rancho Yeto.
Yeah.
Maybe you didn't want to say about that. This picture is an old picture when I remember as a child. Your mother had put a little sign on the shack that was left here, and it was always fun to see, because when we got to Nestlin Ranch, it said, "Not much Rancho Yeto," and it's just a little hut there.
I was saying it wasn't your mother.
No, it was your mother.
I know it, and it was very embarrassing. And I should have brought it. I actually have a picture of my dad riding a horse away from the cabin, and it actually shows the foundation that house set on.
So tell us, you run your cattle now. When we start up quail dug way that we came out, the hay rocks at the bottom, that's your permit.
We're kind of from the hay rocks to town.
And then on top, when we get up here to the cattle guard, where it turns off to Segmiller Mountain, you start your permit there, and you run all this way, and you run this way.
Yeah, we go over this way.
How far?
Kind of over there to the southernmost part of this mountain here.
Okay, and lakes are back this way.
How many head of cattle do you run?
This is for years and years, this was permitted for 84 head. And that's part of the history too, is how these permits came into being. And we probably just don't have enough time, but, you know, the pioneers started coming out here. They were looking for mines. They were, you know, prospecting. They also realized they could run cattle. At some point, sheep became a big thing. And this was all before 1934. And 1934 is when the tailored grazing came in. And before that, anybody could bring anything out here and do anything they wanted. And there were a lot of sheep, there were a lot of cattle before 1934.
Wasn't one of those Preston Nutter was one of those, right? Wow.
When you get to Bundyville, and Mount Trumbull, and the schoolhouse, a lot of them came in 1960.
Yeah.
That was, there was several homestead acts, but the one in 1960 is when a lot of people came in here.
So the Taylor Grazing Act was the beginning really of the Bureau of Land Management.
Yes, thank
Just
you.
for people's information.
Yeah.
Terry, you didn't talk about the Mustangs. Mustang Knolls, Mustangers in the area. You wanna,
Did you see the picture on the back of the other one?
It's one you're in. That one. Yep.
There's three of
Right
them.
here?
Okay,
there we
turn that around. Can you see that, Larry?
oh yeah, I can see it. I know what it is. They don't. Go ahead and tell them.
This picture and a couple of these others, this is Walter Shelley. This is does anybody know Walter Shelley? Three of these pictures came from the Shelley family. And there's very few pictures of anything anywhere out here on the strip. But what they would do is, you know, they started coming out here soon after they got to St. George, maybe even before. They would come out here a horseback and occasionally somebody would lose a horse. It wasn't too many years, and there were wild horses in this area. Definitely wild. This is probably Sherm, and but I got to look, and that motor almost looked stripped a little bit. And then there's an axle laying on the ground in front of the rear tire, and I realized that has been parked probably for a while. But what they're doing is they're imitating what they did at an earlier time. And the only place this would work is kind of out towards Little Tanks, which would be your next stop. Over here in the thick trees and where there's washes, this isn't going to work very good.
Well, tell them what they did on it.
Oh, they would use this, and I couldn't see it, but somewhere there would have been a kind of a hitching dowry post, and they would, what's interesting, they would watch these horses and they'd wait for them to come into water. When they were finished drinking and full of water, they couldn't run quite as fast. And especially when they were roping them on their horses, they would wait for them to water. When they come out of water, that's when they'd build to them. And they decided to try this. So this was their horse. And Walter here has got his rope, and he's ready to catch one. Sherm's driving and watching for any washes, anything that rocks, you know, and wild, rugged. I just can't imagine.
They'd rope him and tie him down.
Pardon?
They'd rope him and tie him down.
He had a store here, and I don't know just how long it lasted. My dad was born 1921, and he can remember stopping here with his mother, thinking maybe he got a soda pop.
He was also the postmaster.
D.M. Parker.
Right.
Dan Parker.
And Dad used to say that he would get paid by how much mail he would process. And so he bagged up little bags of Arizona strip wheat and mailed them all over the world.
Every story makes you think of another story. D.M. Parker's the one that would claim that you could get anything you needed here at his store. So somebody came and was going to pull a fast one on him and asked him about false teeth. If he could get them. without even thinking about it, DM.
So Terry, who built the corrals right here?
That would have been DM Parker. In this picture here, you can the house is right here. You can see the house. And this stockade would be that same stockade. This was a fence running this way. Right here. And this gate right here, those are the actual original gate posts. All of it in there.
Well, we want to.
Anyway, DM Parker had a daughter named Evanale, and when the Bundys and some of the others were coming, going both ways, but when they were coming out, they would stay here a lot of times, and then the next morning they'd head for Mount Trumbull, and she would ride with them up here to the divide. It's about 4 miles, and when you go over that divide, it'll say the Evanale Pass, 5,200 feet, and that's named for this daughter of DM Parker, Evanale.
Great.
Well, we want to. When I was growing up, okay, at high school level, the Bundys, they put on a Bundy assembly, high school assembly at Dixie High School. It was a classic, okay? And then about after 1973, Mount Trumbull just kind of disintegrated. The town was no longer full-time residents. Residents came, a lot of the ranchers would just kind of commute. And that's why I say kind of, because after the mid-70s, about the only one that was out here was Pat Bundy, and I interviewed him for the Spectrum newspaper, and that was in the mid-80s, and he was the last full-time resident out here, right? Okay, so I'm going to turn the time over to Bill to tell you about Little Tanks.
Miles up here, there's a big tank too. This one's a little tank.
So which
Yeah, so near Poverty Mountain, about 7 miles away, were the hallmarks. As you continue to roll north further, were the Christmans, the Cooks. Out to the west were John and Becky Welsh, Albie and Iona, Shelley. 4 miles further were the Childers, Frank and Bertie. Now, my grandpa's best friend was Al Childers, and so when he got his chores done, he was able to go out to the Childers, and keep in mind that was about a 7-mile trip. Him and Al got into a lot of trouble, and I'm not going to share too many of those stories today, but Al was, they served together in the military, and Al's dream was always the cabins, the towns, the buildings are just a little bit further out. So, and then after we get some of that, then we'll come back here, and then we will head south on a much rougher road, okay? And it's steeper going down to Barton Ranch. So it's 14 miles there. If you're thinking about if you have a 2
carpool with somebody who has a couple months ago.
And the reason they were called to be church leaders is because their father was the most praying man on the strip. Orville Bundy prayed for him.
We haven't had rain since he died, so. Those are pictures of the original homesteads. As you can look around through the valley, there's a bunch of homesteads. Most of them are worn down, pretty bad shape. We've got some actual pictures when they were a little bit better shape, and so we can show you that. Right behind you here is kind of a map of the homesteads in the heyday, and I'll kind of talk about that just a little bit. But you can see they were spread out throughout. Where you came from Little Tank and from Whipple through the Main Street Valley, there's a bunch of those, and then most of the private homestead was done right here in what we call Mount Trumbull. So Bill and I and our brother and our two sisters are the sons and daughters of Orville and Sally Bundy. Abraham was born in 1859. And Ella was born in 1865. Abraham was born in Illinois, and Ella was born in Nebraska. And they met and married and started their family in Nebraska. They had 9 children. Their oldest was a daughter. Her name is Lily. She homesteaded about 2 miles to the north of us here. We passed their homestead on the way out. Roy, my grandpa, was the second of those 9 children. James Bundy, he homesteaded right here behind us about 3/4 of a mile. Then Omer, he homesteaded about a mile to the north. Ina, she homesteaded somewhere close. Mamie, Vivian, Pat homesteaded about 4 miles to the north west of us. Chester, also known as Chet, homesteaded right here behind us about 3/4 of a mile. And then Edna, and she homesteaded to the south of us about 1.5 miles.
The first act, yeah. The first act is 1862. The second. Okay.
So right during the
The
Civil War.
homestead, they come and they get proved up on, live on 640 acres for 5 years. If they proved up on it, stayed on it for that long, then it became private property.
So that's why most of this area in this community is private property. Most all the other property around here is federal land, BLM, and then there's dotted state sections as well. But because they all homesteaded here, and each one of them were able to get the 640 acres, or a section of land, that's why most all of this is still private land. Now, Abraham and Ella were baptized, or Ella was baptized in Cozad, Nebraska, to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The 2 missionaries that baptized her, or taught her the gospel, was an Elder Bill from Richfield, Utah, and an Elder Bunker from Bunkerville, Nevada. So after she joined the church and they kind of allowed the missionaries to live with them, their family and all the community kind of said, we're done with you. And so they kind of decided we better move to people that kind of want to be like us, or we want to be like them. And so they left Nebraska and came west, entered Utah in the Morgan Valley, and Abraham then was baptized, remember, in Morgan Lake. And then they came following their 2 missionaries. They came down, I believe they stopped in Richfield, and ultimately ended up going down to Bunkerville, Nevada, and seeing Elder Bunker. Well, in the way, they ended up stopping and coming back and settling at Beaver Dam, Littlefield area. Some history, they then went to the colonies in Mexico for a while. They went to Oregon for a while. And Abraham and Roy and James, maybe Omer, were working out here at the Grand Gulch Mine about this time with the Homestead Act came out, and they one afternoon were riding their horses and kind of came up over this rise way over here and looked across over here, and the saying was they could see just a great patch of green over here, and they all said that's where we want to settle. And that was the fall of 1916, November-ish. Well, so they kind of, I think Abraham stayed, Roy and James went back to Littlefield, St. Thomas, which is under Lake Mead. Not under it now, but that's where it was. St. Thomas, and then they brought their families back the spring of 1918. So that's why on the signs we consider the settlement started in 1916. Okay? So in 1918, so Abraham's homestead is this house right over here you can see. That was his original homestead, and then the others were as I kind of directed it at first. Lily, his first daughter, had 9 children. Okay, and they homesteaded down the road. Roy had 12 children. My dad was the 12th of 12. James had 12 plus 2, and I won't go into the plus 2, but he had 14. There's a little bit of a crossover here. Omer had 8. Ina had 8. Mamie had 7. Vivian had 8. Chester had 14 plus 3. Infant Des had 17 right out here, right here. And then Edna had 7 question mark. So at first they needed a place to go to church to kind of educate their kids, and I believe it happened either in Roy's homestead or Abraham's homestead initially. But they felt like they needed to have a central location, so they built this school / church / meeting house / everything in 1918. And people attended this. Our immediate family lived out here until, and there was some confusion on this, but till 1968. All the BLM records show that it closed down in 1966, but it was actually 68 when we left. There was 2 other families that were still living here, and then soon after we left, then they left, and that was the end of it. Yes, Larry.
I want to clarify though. You said when you started, this was Mount Trumbull.
It was actually called Bundyville.
That's what I want to make sure. But you just barely answered that question as to why it would be called Bundyville, because there were so many Bundys.
There was so many Bundys, but so the Bundys homesteaded first, but at the heydays between 1930 and 1940, there were approximately 250 people in about a 15 or 20 mile radius of right here at the schoolhouse. Through the years, they had to recruit teachers to come up from the other side of the river. It was difficult to keep teachers. I think one of the teachers that taught my dad here actually taught my 2 brothers too. She was a recurring, Mrs. Williams. But in 1968, then they closed everything down, and that was kind of the end of the situation. Since then, when my dad was alive, he spent an awful lot of time out here. If there was a permanent resident, it would have probably been him. And then Vivian Pat, until he passed away, was out here an awful lot as well.
Didn't your mother teach you also?
My mom taught 1 year. She had 8 students in 6 grades. Now, Bill can describe it better, but right in the middle there was a potbelly stove, and in the winter they had to huddle around because it was cold. There was no power. I mean, we got things run now where a generator will turn lights on, but back then there was no power. It was kerosene or candles. So all the 250 people were, obviously, and that's why I told you how many kids all these people had. A majority of them were Bundys or related to Bundys, but there was an awful lot of them that weren't Bundys. Some of them then married Bundys, and a lot of them were related. Others didn't, but there was, as you can see on this map, there was a lot of homesteads throughout from here to, especially from here to Little Tank. A lot of people, and so they, yeah.
Okay, so the first homesteads were 640 acres. How did they get to be so concentrated? Why are they still called homesteads? People leaving the 640 and then did they have
They
a
sold
left?
some off, and then there are some that weren't a full 640. There was
That's through 20s
and 160s as well. Bill can probably address that a little bit.
Well, if you had 9 kids, there's gonna be a lot of.
Well, in 1918, as a church, kind of converted to a school combination. Then after we left, the other 2 families left, it kind of went to shambles, and it was in bad shape. So in 1994, it was restored. 94, 94, it was restored. We tore it all down, rebuilt it, exact dimensions, exact replica of what it was before. And then in 2000, we had some vandals. Some kids came over here and decided they wanted to light it on fire, and so it burned down to the ground. And so we regrouped with the partnership of the BLM and rebuilt it again. And that's what we got right here. Some of these pictures, most of them were put on the wall by my mom and my sister, but there's picture, this little picture right up here was little Billy, my big brother, in school. That was one of his school class projects. My other brother Clay's got some. I'm in a picture or 2 as a baby. But then we've got a bunch of veterans, a bunch of military people that left from here and gave everything. And some were able to come home, but a lot of history right here. Do you have any question? This is right here, actually, this picture is this is my mom, and this was her school class, just right outside right here when she taught. My mom was born and raised in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She married my dad. They lived in Las Vegas. They lived in Bunkerville, and then they lived right up here. For 7 years, no running water, no power, no electricity, no telephone, an outhouse about 50 yards from the house, and she came from Philadelphia. Wow. We love my mom. Any questions? Yes.
The ancient history here, they harvested a lot of the timber for the temple. Did it come out of that mountain?
Okay, so where the timber came from, they always talk about Mount Trumbull.
Yeah.
Well, it was actually Mount Logan that they got the timber off, which was, if you could see right up, you could see it coming out here, but about 8 miles from right here, up on top, is Mount Trumbull, Mount Logan, and that's where they harvested the timber for the inner workings of the St. George Temple. And show you cactus flats. Because this flat right here there was a lot of cactus. You don't see very much of it now, but that was the original intended name for Mount Trumbull. Before it went to Bundyville, and now it's whatever you call it. But
But it's just every so often. There we go.
So Durant, feel free to stay back so you're not in the dust, right? If it's getting dusty, you can slow down.
Thank you.
Have a good tour.
Thanks.
Hey guys, if they follow up.
One thing about it, there's a lot of lava here.
There's many. That rock, yeah. Colorado River looks relatively calm down here, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's a rapid right there.
Yep.
And these rapids are much more intense when you're down there in them.
So it's just beyond the Trumbull right here. If you go around it. So it comes up to that little lava rock, and then you come up around. Because they don't care for that kind of stuff.
He was just saying this side is national park property, but the other side is Wallapai Indian. So they land the helicopter on the other side.
And then Pierce Ferry, Lake Mead is 100 miles that way.
How far to Torrey?
To Torrey, well, you can't, Torrey, well, you drive up to Torrey, so when you go back to the